Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi everyone. In this video, I will discuss about experimental research, which is an important part of research methods. Well, before I start the video, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Siti Hartati, and in this video, I met to fulfill the final project of the research methods course taught by Mrs. Magdalena. So in this video, we will talk about definition, types, sampling techniques, techniques of collecting data, and the last is technique of analyzing data in the context of experimental research. Okay, the first material about definition of experimental research. So, experimental research is a research method used to test and understand the cause and effect relationship between two things, namely certain treatment given by researchers and the results or change to occur as a result of the treatment. The opinion of Sugiono and Arikunto provide complementary pictures of the purpose and approach of experimental research. According to Sugiono, experimental research is conducted under control condition. This means that research must ensure that all other factors outside the given treatment don't affect the results of the study. In other words, research must create a situation that allows them to focus only on the effects of the treatment being tested. Meanwhile, Arikunto emphasized that the main purpose of experimental research is to find a cause and effect relationship. It means that researchers create certain conditions by providing treatment to see if any change occur in the object of research. So it can be concluded that both experts state the experimental research is a method that is systematically designed to ensure the results obtained are valid or reliable. This research aims to isolate the treatment variable so that researchers can understand exactly how something works or affects something else. Control conditions in this experimental research are very important because without control, it is difficult to ensure that the results obtained are purely due to the treatment given. Okay, next material about the types of experimental research. Okay, the first type is true experimental. So, true experimental is one type of experimental research that is very important to get accurate results. In this research, we divide participants into two groups, the experimental groups and the control group. This is done using randomization so that each participant has an equal chance of being assigned to one of the groups. This experiment, the experimental groups is given a certain treatment while the control group is not given that treatment or given a standard treatment as a comparison. After the treatment is complete, we will look at the results of both groups to see if the treatment actually had an effect. Since the process is well controlled and randomization is used, the result will be more valid and reliable. And the second type is quasi-experimental. So, quasi-experimental is a research method that used to test a cause and effect relationship without using randomization in group assignment. Although it doesn't involve randomization, this research still compares two main groups, namely the experimental group that receive a certain treatment and the control group that doesn't receive a treatment. Due to the absence of randomization, quasi-experimental are susceptible to the influence of outside variables that may affect the results of the study. Therefore, research needs to use analytical techniques that are able to control for these variables to ensure that the observed difference between the experimental and control group are truly due to the treatment. And the third is pre-experimental. So, pre-experimental is type of experimental research that involves one group of subjects without a control group to compare. This research is conducted by giving treatment to the group and observing the result. Due to the absence of a control group, this study has limitation in ensuring that the changes that occur in the subjects are truly caused by the treatment given. This is because there is not comparison that can show whether the changes are purely due to the treatments or may be influenced by other factors outside the treatment. And the last is factorial design. So factorial design is type of experimental research that aims to examine the effect of more than one independent variable in one experience. In these designs, each combination of level of independent variables is studied to determine the individual effect of each variable as well as the interaction between these variables on the dependent variables. This approach allows researchers to evaluate how the independent variables influence each other, in addition to studying the direct influence of each independent variable on the research result. The interaction between independent variables is the main focus because it can show different results than the effect of variables in isolation. So next material about sampling techniques in experimental research. So first samplings is random samplings. Random samplings, according to Sugiono, is a sampling techniques that provide equal opportunities for each member of the population to be selected as part of the research samples. The point of this definition is that each individual or element in the population has an equal opportunity to be selected without any discrimination, preference, or particular influence from the researcher. This is done to ensure that the samples taken truly represents the entire population fairly and objectively. This technique aims to eliminate bias in the sampling process so that the research result obtained can be considered valid and can be generalized to the entire population under study. Therefore, random sampling requires a random selection process where all elements of the population have an equal chance of being part of the samples without exception. Next is purposive samplings. As explained by Sugiono, is sampling techniques based on certain consideration. The points of this definition is that the selection of samples is not done randomly, but deliberately by the researchers by considering certain characteristics, criteria, or objective relevance to the research. The researchers use knowledge, experience, or deep understanding of the population to determine which elements are considered most suitable and able to provide the data or information needed. These techniques aim to ensure that the selected samples can represent the phenomenon or aspect to be studied more specifically and in depth. Therefore, the decision to determine the samples in purposive samplings is based on the relevance and suitables of the sample's elements to the research objective, not just equal opportunity or chance as is random techniques. Next is cluster random sampling. According to Azwar, in cluster random samplings, the randomization process is carried out certain group in the population, not on individual directly. What this means is that the population is first divided into several groups or clusters based on certain shared characteristics. After that, the selection is done randomly on these groups, so that only certain cluster will be taken as research sample. This technique differs from the individual randomization method because the focus is not on randomly selecting each individual, but rather on selecting the entire group as the samplings unite. Thus, all members in the selected cluster automatically becomes part of the sample. This approach is used when the population is widely dispersed or when clusters are already natural formed in the population. thus simplifying the data collection process without compromising the principles of randomization. Next is probability samplings. According to Wawan, probability samplings is a sampling technique in which member of the population has an equal chance of being selected as part of the samples. The point of this statement is that in this sampling process, all elements in the population are given equal opportunities to enter the samples without discrimination or exclusion. This technique ensures that the selection process is fair and objective, usually by using a structured random mechanism. The aims of this approach is to provide representative samples so that the data obtained can reflect the characteristics of the population as whole. Probability samplings also aims to minimize bias in the samplings of selection process so that the research results are reliable and can be generalized to the population more accurately. Therefore, the basic principles of probability samplings is equal opportunity for each element in the population. And the last is non-probability sampling. According to Sugiono, non-probability sampling is a sampling technique that doesn't provide equal opportunity for each member of the population to be selected as part of the samples. The point of this statement is that this technique, the selection of samples element is not done randomly, but based on certain considered research need or ease of access. Not all elements in the population have opportunity to be selected, as the researchers emphasize more efficiency, relevant, or specific criteria that suit the research objective. This approach is often used when the population is too large or when the researchers doesn't have full access to all elements of the population, so the sampling process is selective. Since the changes are not equal, the resulting samples may be less representative of the population, but is still considered valid if it fills the needs and objective of the research. This technique emphasizes flexibility in sample selection while still considering the relevance of the data obtained to answer the research problem. So we move to next material, that is technique of collecting data. So in experimental research, there are three techniques for data collection, namely test techniques, non-techniques, and the last is documentation techniques. So test technique is a data collection technique used to measure the ability, knowledge, or skills or individual directly and objectively. Three types of techniques. The first is pre-test and post-test. Pre-test is a test conducted before a treatment or learning begins. The aim is to determine the initial ability or initial conditions of students. With the pre-test, researchers or teachers can understand the extent to which students have mastered the material before the learning process takes place. Post-test is a test given after treatment or learning is complete. This test is used to measure learning outcomes, see changes that occur, and find out how effective the treatment of method given is improving students' understanding. And the second is performance test. A performance test is a test used to measure a person's ability to complete certain tasks or projects that are participles in nature. In this test, participants are asked to directly perform an activity or real work, not just answer the question or provide theory. The purpose of the test is to see the extent to which a person is able to apply their knowledge and skills in real situation. It also helps assess practical expertise directly and provides an accurate picture of the participant's ability to perform a specific task. The last is oral test. So this test is type of test conducted by direct correction and answer methods between the examiner and the participants. This test aim to measure the participants' ability to speak, answer questions, or express their opinions orally. This test is very useful for measuring communication skills, especially in situations that require direct interaction, such as interviews, discussion, or presentation. In addition, this test also helps evaluate participants' confidence when speaking in front of others. The second is non-test techniques. Non-test techniques are techniques used to collect data on individual attitudes, opinions, behaviors, or perception which cannot be measured through tests. There are 4 types of non-test techniques. The first is questionnaire. A questionnaire is a tool used to collect information or data from respondents through a series of questions given. The purpose of this questionnaire is to find out the opinions, experience, or view of respondents on a topic. Usually, the questions in the questionnaire are arranged in the form of multiple choice, rating scales, or fill-in, which must be answered by the respondent in writing. The completion of this questionnaire can be done in person or through other media, such as online. The second is attitude scales. An attitude scale is a tool used to measure a person's attitude or opinion towards a particular statement or issue. These tools help to determine the extent to which a person agrees or disagrees with a given statement. One of the most frequently used types of attitude scales is the Likert scale. On these scales, respondents are asked to choose of one several answer opinions, such as strongly agree, neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree. By using this scale, researchers can assess the respondents' level of agreement or rejection of a topic in more structured manner. Next is interview. Interview is data collection technique conducted through direct conversation between the interview and the respondent. In this process, the interviewer asks the respondents to obtain more in-depth and detailed information about the topic being researched. Interview allows interviewers to explore answers more openly, providing opportunities for respondents to explain their opinions, experience, or knowledge more fully. This technique is often used when the required information can be obtained solely through questionnaires or surveys, especially if the topic under discussion requires a deeper understanding, clarification, or further explained from the respondent. Interview can be conducted face-to-face, over the phone, or using other communication media. Last is observation. Observation is data collection techniques that is carried out by directly observing the behavior or activities of respondents in real situation. In this method, researchers record what happens in the field without interviewing or influencing the condition being observed. The purpose of observation is to get a clear and objective pictures of how a person or group acts, interacts, or behaves in a particular situation. This technique is useful for observing phenomena that are difficult to reveal through interviews or questionnaires, especially those related to actions, habits, and routines that respondents are not always aware of. In observation, researchers must ensure that observations are made neutrally and do not influence the condition or behavior being observed. Observation can be done openly, where respondents know that they are being observed, or covertly, where respondents do not realize that they are being observed. And the last techniques is documentation techniques. Documentation techniques is data collection method carried out by utilizing pre-existing documents, achiever, or records. These documents can be in the form of written data, image, videos, or other recordings relevant to the research. There are 2 types of documentation techniques. The first is utilizing existing data. This technique is used to save time, effort, and researchers in data collection. Instead of collecting data from scratch, researchers can utilize existing and professionally documented data. For example, data that already exists in the form of reports, notes, previous research results, or others' achievements. And the second is complementing data from others' techniques. Documented data can be used to support or verify information obtained from interviews, observation, or tests. It means that previously record or document data such as reports, achieves, or previous year's research result can help confirm whether the information obtained through interview or observation is accurate and correct. There are two types of technique analyzing the data. The first is descriptive data analysis. This technique is used to summarize data without drawing conclusions by calculating several statistical measures such as mean, median, mode, standard deviation, and range. The purpose of these techniques is to describe the initial characteristics of the experimental data obtained. By using these measures, researchers can get a general idea of how the data is spread or distributed without immediately making further interpretation or conclusion. This technique is particularly useful for providing an initial idea of patterns or trends in the data before conducting or in-depth analysis. And the second is inferential data analysis. This technique is used to test the hypothesis that has been formulated and make generalization from sample data to a large population. That is, after the researchers collect this data from representative samples, these techniques help the test whether the proposed hypothesis is correct or not based on the data. In the category of inferential data analysis, there are several techniques used, namely, the first is the t-test. This technique is used to compare the average between two samples groups, either paired or independent. The aim is to see if there is a significant differences between the two groups. In this case, the researchers test whether the mean differences found between the two groups is due to the particular factors being tested or is mere change. These techniques help the researchers in identifying whether the two groups being tested show meaningful differences in the context of the variable being studied. The second is analysis of variance or ANOVA. This technique is used to compare the means of more than two groups, with the aim to see if there is a significant differences between the groups. This process is done to determine if the differences that exist are not due to change, but rather due to a specific factor that is being tested. These techniques allow the researchers to analyze the data and determine if the variable being tested has a significant effect on the different group. Thus, these techniques help in identifying whether the differences found in the data are relevant and statistically meaningful. The third is the chi-square test. This method is used to analyze the relationship or association between two categorical variables. The aim is to determine whether change or differences in one variable are associated with change or differences in the other variable. This analysis doesn't look at the numerical values, but rather focus on the categories or groups that exist within each variable. With this method, the researchers can assess whether there are certain patterns that indicate an association between the two variables being tested, and whether the relationship is statistically significant. The fourth is linear regression. This method is used to determine the functional relationship between independent variables and dependent variables. The goal is to understand how change in the independent variables can affect the dependent variables. In other words, this method helps to identify and quantify the cause and effect relationship between variables. And the last is correlation. This method is used to measure the strength and direction of the relationship between two continuous variables. The goal is to determine the extent to which change in one variable affects the other, as well as to determine whether the relationship is positive, negative, or no relationship at all. This technique is often used to describe a linear relationship between two variables, where the result provide a correlation coefficient value that indicates how strong and direct the relationship between the two variables is. That's all for me. Thanks for watching my video. For endless, please forgive me. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.